So thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are. We've got quite a few people from a few different locations. Christine and I were just discussing about when we first met. I think it was a conference 10, 11 years ago. So for those of you who don't know Christine, I don't quite know how to introduce Christine because I think she's a bit of a Swiss Army knife in the enterprise architecture world. So I wouldn't want to really do a disservice in saying she's good at this or that. I just say she just fits in every single box and is quite often my go-to person when I have any questions around what's happening in market. One of our enterprises at the moment is she's helping EAs, I think, in improve their value and coaching and training in a very different way and a very different ethos. And I'm sure she'll sort of talk to us a little bit about that. But I welcome you all, and I welcome Dr. Christine Stephenson to our Lunch and Learn session. And over to you, Christine.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thanks for that beautiful introduction as well. I'm just making sure I'm on the right screen. So a couple of years ago, Bud Papagai and I got together, and mainly because we were so passionate about wanting to help enterprise architects find their place in the world and to make sure that they could have useful, productive, and great careers as enterprise architects. And hence we conceived this organization called Coaching Enterprise Architects, because that's what we do. And we believe that every one of us, each one of us is really a good architect. And what we want to do is to help support good architects become better architects and get better architects to become great architects. Because there's along our journeys, we recognize that there were a lot of people that helped us reach where we are today. And the tremendous generosity of the community in helping us learn and develop our careers helped us to be where we are today, where we're now in a position, on the downhill of our career path, where we have an opportunity to help people like yourselves not make the mistakes we did, and learn from our mistakes so that you can make your good better and your better great. So I'm truly am so grateful to be able to spend this time with you, because again, I don't want to leave this world or my career with all this knowledge in my head and missing out on an opportunity to be able to share it with all of you. So again, the slides that we're going to go through today is stuff that I've actually practiced myself and that I help people to implement within their organizations. So Bud and I and the coaches within Coaching Enterprise Architects reach out to organizations where they're looking to uplift the capability of the team. So we're dealing with a lot of CIOs who recognize the value of enterprise architecture within their organization and also understand that it's not the role of just the enterprise architects to do good enterprise architecture. So we're working with a lot of companies to actually uplift the capability of the CIO and their next level, and coaching them to become the coaches and leaders of enterprise architecture within their team. And I can tell you, based on the fact that my contract keeps getting renewed every year to help these companies, that they see the value that coaching provides them. So we're not a training company, so we don't do any canned PowerPoint presentations and bring people together and do training sessions. We're a learning organization. And when I say we're a learning organization, we actually help people to apply the knowledge we impart to their everyday work, so that when we give you a little piece of knowledge of how to do, for example, today's session, how do you create a performance framework out of your capability model? We then help you to achieve that within your organization as well, by helping you to do the fishing rather than the traditional consulting model where people come in and do the fishing for you. So I hope you take something away from this session. It's offered in the spirit of helping you to learn, and always happy to help you apply that knowledge as well. So what we're going to cover today is, what is performance management in the first place? It does surprise me even today that there are people out in companies who don't understand what performance management is besides their own personal performance management and how they are rewarded. So I'm going to talk about the two different aspects of performance management in organizations. And I'm going to give you a little capability planning refresher. I know at some of the lunch and learns we've talked about capability modeling. So I'm just going to give you a little refresher so that we're all on the same level in terms of how to use capability models as performance management tools. I'll then take you through a couple of IT capability models, because what I found is whilst it's difficult for us as enterprise architects to go out and get the business to come on board and let's use capability planning as our way of measuring performance, reality is you're not going to get a lot of business people on board, and it's going to be like moving a great big mountain. So what I'm going to do today is to show you how you can use the IT capability model and eat your own dog food and turn the IT capability model into a performance reporting tool so that you can then show other people how to achieve the same. And hopefully if they can see the pragmatic way you're using IT capabilities to report performance, you can then get more buy-in from the business. So that's what we're going to do in terms of applying what you have learned. So how do we take an IT capability model? And I'm going to use a real example I've used with a client of mine to show you how to turn it into a reporting tool. And then, of course, we'll save some time for questions as well. And in fact, I'd like to have a good discussion about it. So let's move on to what is performance management. So, you know, the technical definition or the dictionary definition of organization performance management is really making sure that companies are using their resources in the right way, right? And when we say in the right way, we want to make sure that they are strategically focused, right? Are we actually achieving our strategic objectives, right? Have we arrived at our goals? It helps us then to align our resources to help achieve those strategies. And when we're not doing it, we're getting this early warning system, and we're all familiar with using RAG indicators, you know, your red, amber, green indicators to highlight, hey, Houston, I think we might be having a problem over here. And it allows us then to take action, right? And to what we call adjust the strategy in order to help achieve our strategic objectives and goals. So we all know that as enterprise architects, our job is to help align strategy with execution. So what's been missing for me in practice is, as enterprise architects, we quite often go off and define the as's and the to be, and, you know, here's a roadmap to help you get there. But then we haven't really supplemented that with a measurement framework that allows us to see how are we going with actually achieving that to be and that future state and target state. So that's what this session is going to be about. How do you actually turn your framework, your as's and your to be and your roadmap into a performance reporting tool? So a little question for you, and I'd love to see, you know, just by people raising their hands, how many of you have seen a good, well-designed corporate reporting framework? Anybody? Yeah, anyone used a corporate reporting framework? Do you contribute to a corporate performance framework in your companies? If you raise your hand and want to open your mic, feel free to do that too. Remember, we want to have the session as interactive as we can. So Andrew will monitor the raised hands. Otherwise, I'm going to assume all the enterprise architects on the call. Okay, we got one raised hand. Roxanne, go for it.
Hello there. So I've worked in the public service, and the Australian Public Service has their census, and there's a whole lot of capability reporting as part of that. It's run by HR. It often isn't shared amongst organizations, but I worked for an organization where the CIO did have a little troubleshooting team, which I was a member of, and we really took some of the census results, which were very poor in this particular agency, very seriously. And she picked about 6 different things that she wanted to do. And one of them that I led was learning and development. There was a lot of unhappiness in the IT group around learning and development, and we managed to turn around the learning and development processes, work with the managers, give them training, rework the budget, and did a whole lot of things. So again, we used that, the census reporting, and then it drove a very intentional program of change, and we were able to see a dramatic uplift in the numbers. So that was quite an exciting use of reporting actually driving change in one agency.
Thanks for sharing that, Roxanne. The interesting thing that you mentioned is that it was HR driven, and quite often you find that if organizations are mature in performance reporting, it's typically within HR because it's about people's performance. And over here, what we're going to look at is how do we actually report organization performance, which is made up of not just people, how are people going, but how's the organization going as a whole? And we all know that at the end of the day, when we're talking the capability language, we're actually talking about people, process, information, and technology or tools. And therefore, what we want to look at is those 4 dimensions of performance and obviously financial performance as well. So again, one of the early pieces of work that I've done with a lot of organizations, for example, with the Emirates Group especially, is to actually help our business intelligence teams to define corporate performance reporting frameworks that look at these 2 aspects of organization performance and also people performance, and how do we actually cascade our reporting up to the corporate level, or if you like, the board level. So these questions here, do you know what your corporate KPIs are, is really important for us architects, because how else would we know whether strategy is aligned to execution? What are those KPIs that we're working towards? And therefore that question, should you know, is tongue in cheek, because absolutely you should know what your corporate KPIs are. That's why it's so important for us to be able to define our KPIs in smart language: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time frame. So I'll move on because I will discuss each one of those points in further detail. So here's what a typical performance dashboard is in a lot of organizations I've worked in. Typically created using your business intelligence solutions like Tableau or Lumira or the Microsoft product. Geez, the name skipped right out of my head. But what you traditionally see are lots of color: red, amber, green. Red, everybody know is, thank you, Power BI. Red, amber, green. Red's really bad, green's pretty good. Amber means, we might have problems we need to start managing. You see spark lines, the little trend lines in some charts. You see bar charts, histograms, and pie charts as well. So this is typically what managers would look at to get an understanding of how goes the company. So when I worked in the Emirates Group, we used to have a monthly meeting that only focused on how goes IT, where we would review the IT KPIs every month in a very similar dashboard that looks like this, right? And we would have discussions around, why is this like this? What caused this particular red or amber? And then we would talk about, so what were we going to do to actually fix it? So it was a management meeting based on taking action as a result of this dashboard. So we have an opportunity to use our capability models to do dashboard reporting like this. So why are KPIs so important? And I may very likely be preaching to the converted, but this phrase, what gets measured gets done, is the absolute truth, right? If you don't measure performance, if you don't measure how you are going, how would you know that you had a problem that needed remediating? Right? How did you know that you were overspending your budget on absolutely worthless projects if you weren't measuring something, right? And measuring the performance of your project, measuring the performance of your process, measuring the performance of your applications and technology fleets as well. So it's really simple. If you want management to give you attention and to participate in taking action and remediating issues and challenges, you need to be measuring your performance. So again, on this dashboard, there are various things that the CXO board looks at: your EBIT, your revenue, your profit. If you aren't performing according to your profit forecasts and expectations, you know you've got to take some action, right? So when you start with that measurement mindset, you will find that the resources that are allocated to you are a result of you highlighting that you have problems that need support and therefore need funding and resources to fix and resolve and get done. It always does my mind, and when people say, Christine, I'm too busy to talk to you because I'm firefighting all the time. And if I start asking the simple questions, do you know what's actually broken and therefore what's the priority to fix it? Quite often the response is, oh, everything's broken, you know, everything's not going according to plan. Again, another simple statement: if everything is broken, then nothing is broken, right? So why bother fixing everything when you don't have a sense of priority to actually go in and fix it? So again, the way to work out what's a priority to fix and not is to have a measurement system in place and a performance framework in place. So let's look at really quickly, why do performance management systems not work? So poor metrics. One of my pet hate metrics in IT shops is the number of tickets closed every month, right? And so I worked for a company that had an outsourced provider managing the service desk. And they used to get paid based on how many tickets they closed every month. So guess what? Our customers were so unhappy with us because every time they called up service desk to say, I have a problem, could you please fix it? The service desk operator will say, yeah, would spend about probably a couple of minutes with this person and they would close the ticket. And then the person would call back again and say, the problem you just solved isn't working. And then the service desk person would say, raise another ticket. So we were rewarding the wrong behavior, right? We weren't fixing our customers' problems the first time and getting it right. We were rewarding a behavior which says every time a customer calls, don't worry about fixing their problem, just get them to raise more tickets. Because when we raise more tickets, we get paid more, right? Not the behavior that we want in any sort of call center or service desk. So we need to really think about what's the right metric that drives the right performance and encourages the right behaviors. So perhaps one for service desk is first time right? I don't care how long you took to fix this problem. I want you to fix it the first time the customer asks for it or reports the problem. If you can't fix it, at least we then have other metrics which say, hey, this problem got escalated to second level support and they fixed it first time right? So again, setting up and selecting the right metrics is really important to have a healthy performance management system. Setting poor targets, setting unattainable targets. So quite often you have within organizations, and you'll see this reflected in perhaps your own performance KPIs as well. You've been set a target that is so ambiguous that you don't understand what it is. What am I supposed to actually do? So if your metrics are not specific and they're not realistic, they're never going to be achieved, right? You've got a hope in hell of being able to measure, did I actually achieve that or not? So again, setting good attainable targets is key. Comes down to lack of transparency as well, right? If you don't have attainable targets and your target is fuzzy, and you don't really see the connection between your contribution or your team's contribution to the strategic objective, you're going to end up with a lot of problems and issues. Therefore, having transparency and what we call coherency between strategic objectives and project objectives and performance, your own personal performance objectives, seeing that coherency cascade from the CEO all the way down to you in your role and what your contribution is. If that is coherent, you then have transparency. So lack of relevance is another one, right? If I'm sitting in India and I have a KPI to make all the employees in Australia happy, how's that relevant to me, right? So again, we need to pick metrics that are actually relevant to my location, to the work that I do, and to my level of maturity as well, right? So we can't have irrelevant metrics because it just doesn't make sense. Lack of dialogue. So I know working for Rio Tinto, where they did this really well, their performance management framework was one of the most mature I've ever come across, because they are so significantly impacted by commodity price. The organization has to change direction so rapidly based on what commodity prices of gold, coal, diamonds, and whatever it is that they're mining, iron ore especially being a large portion of their business. So every year the CEO would set his KPIs, and then that would get cascaded down through the levels of management. And we would have town halls right around the world. We would have global phone calls where people would talk about what these mean. And therefore, when we had to set our own KPIs, we understood what the KPI was that we had to try and achieve. The second last one, lack of consequences. And Roxanne, I'm sorry to use the government context, but having worked in government myself, I have seen lots of people turn up to work and lots of governments report the performance of their agencies and their departments, and none of it actually makes sense. And nobody actually cares other than elections, right? If you're not happy with how the current government's performing, the only time you can actually do something about it is to elect a new government. So there are lots of people in government, I know it happens in the private sector too, who show up, do something. We don't understand the value of their contribution and how it helps us achieve government objectives, but they just turn up. Performance managing in a lot of, especially large organizations in the private and public sector, are really difficult because we don't have the right KPIs to help understand what is good performance and how far away is this employee that you're trying to manage away from that good performance metric, right? And therefore, quite often you end up with employees getting disgruntled because they see sometimes people who turn up to work and clearly don't have valuable contributions in the office, but they're the ones getting the big bonuses because they're in the in crowd. And because they're cliquey, they get rewarded for just turning up. Whereas somebody who's very quietly working really hard all the time, none of our servers went down, all of our services were up and running, high availability, does not get the same slice of the reward. And therefore, that can have turn into a very different issue. And the last one, lack of management engagement. If your managers don't believe in the KPIs that they are setting for themselves and cascading down to their teams, how do we know what's important and what's not, right? Where should we focus on? So again, when we create these corporate performance frameworks for organization performance and people performance, we must have rich management engagement right from the top, right down through to the teams and the individuals that work within your teams. And why I use the Rio Tinto example as a really good framework and model to follow in terms of the level of engagement and the effort that goes into performance planning and then setting and then reporting. So there's some really good questions coming into the chat. Daryl, how do you prevent the desire to measure things from falling into a Taylorism style trap? Do you want to explain that a little bit more, Daryl?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. Thanks for sharing your time and your experience with us. It's always appreciated. So Taylorism, for those who don't know, early 20th century approach to management, tended to be viewed these days as somewhat inhumane in terms of its ability to break down everything into tiny little tasks and measure them, and then manage against those measures that were aligned to each of those tasks. And it done to the extreme creates very difficult environments for people to be able to survive in. So yes, measure, but where do you draw the line to stop it from becoming the thing that drives the entire behaviour of the organisation?
To be honest, Daryl, leadership has such a strong role to play in setting up healthy performance management systems. When leadership shows that I'm going to walk the talk, here are my KPIs, and here is how I am contributing to the strategic or corporate KPIs, you find that the team, when you work with them to help set these KPIs, and you have your weekly meetings or your monthly meetings, your quarterly reviews, your 6 monthly reviews, whatever those review cycles are, when people understand what they're being measured against and why they're being measured against and how are they going to be assessed against those measurement tasks, you find that provides everybody on the team focus. And what typically happens is, and again, this is just my real experience, when each of my team have a dashboard for themselves and where they can report to me on a weekly basis, whether it's, we use Harvey balls to show progress, but we also show a happy, sad, or, indifferent face to show, how you're actually feeling as well. Because we use those weekly team meetings to focus on what are the risks, what are the issues, and let's fix it, people understand the relationship between I'm fixing this because it's important to help you achieve your KPI. And as a manager, I know exactly what to jump in and help people with so that we avoid, somebody who is just there to turn up to work to get a paycheck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Christine.
No worries. And it's the same thing with clicky people, Patrick. I've worked in a software development company where the cowboys got the most rewards, right? They would literally play ping pong in the rec room during the day and stay back at night to work on the projects and do the work that was allocated to them. But I used to turn up to work and I would do my 9 to 5, get all of my work done and a little bit more. But it was the person in the rec room who would get the reward and attention rather than people like me who were basically doing their job in the time allocated. So again, I would say that was an example of a company where performance management frameworks didn't work at all, right? And therefore putting one in place and ensuring it as a healthy system ensures not only the company performs well, but the people perform well as well. So I'm going to cover a little bit more in terms of how do these performance management systems actually work. So I love my strategic management triangle, right? So the executives look at company performance at a very high level, right? We see summary data. Dashboards are highly summarized as well. But as we go from the senior executive level down to individuals, our reports are getting to be increasing levels of detail, right? And increasing levels of frequency as well from the bottom up, right? So individuals and people in my team would provide me with a weekly report. And, you know, if you're in a highly dynamic industry like food manufacturing, perhaps the reports are daily reports. All of that gets hoovered up into a team report, which again gets hoovered up into a business operations report, and then fed up to senior management, right up to the executive. So the executives may not see the reports every day, but they see the reports either monthly, quarterly, and every 6 months, and absolutely annually as well. So again, most corporate performance frameworks are based on this triangle as well. And if you have a chat with your business intelligence teams and the people that create these dashboards, you'll be able to see examples of how your company is using corporate performance reporting through your business intelligence tools. So again, I want to make the distinction about there being organization performance versus employee performance. So most organizations will have their HR departments lead and establish an employee performance management system. But in a lot of organizations, you will have the strategy team within the business. Typically, the people that created the strategic plan for your business also create the corporate performance framework. Or you may even have a dedicated team within the organization that looks at nothing but organization performance. And quite often you'll see that sometimes these people also look after organization design within the company as well, right? And obviously I'm speaking about quite large organizations that have the ability to specialize within these domains. So again, the important thing is to make sure that when you're reporting your metrics and your KPIs, that you have a balance, that your dashboard is not just filled with only organization KPIs, that you also have employee performance KPIs as well. I always remember a LinkedIn article I read from, Virgin. Oh God, it's mid-afternoon. Richard Branson. I forgot his name. So Richard Branson once wrote an article on, organization performance and how he had changed the whole experience, in Virgin by making flying really happy and fun and great for kids, and with just this exciting travel. And he used to report, and here's how well the organization is performing. But he slowly started realizing that employee performance was actually dropping because there was a type of culture being built in the airline that was now not supported by, quite large parts of the organization, because everybody was just young and beautiful and they were the in crowd. So what he started focusing on more was to actually start measuring employee performance, because he realized if employees weren't having great experiences, then the organization was not performing well either. So again, he started bringing in those two views into his management meetings, because knowing how employees perform and whether they are happy at work was equally important to how the airline was performing as well. So we're going to move now into just doing a quick refresher on capability planning. And as I said, just getting into, getting on the same page. So capabilities for me is always made up of people, process, information, and technology, right? And when we look at changing our performance in terms of increasing the maturity of our capabilities, we look across all four of these dimensions. So when we talk about employee or people performance management, this is the bit of capability that we're talking about. How are employees performing? When we look at how organizations are performing, we're actually looking at the motivation model. And we're looking more specifically at our strategic objectives, these things down on the bottom. Because remember, they are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time frame, right? So they give us our KPIs, our corporate KPIs that need to be tracked through our strategy. are we achieving and delivering our strategy? And over here, we're looking at how are our people performing in terms of achieving our strategic objectives. But we know that process performance and how we use data and information and our technology performance all contribute as well to organization performance. And therefore being able to understand, what's the scope of the strategy and what are we expected to deliver becomes really important, and enter the capability model. So I know you can't read this capability model. It's just meant to show you what a capability model looks like. Now we're going to use the capability model as an anchor to help us talk about performance. And when we look at it, you can see right on top where we've got our firm's value chain. What we want to do is to look at how are the different parts of our business performing. In order to do that, we can drill down into the capability layer to look at the maturity and how are we performing in terms of improving the maturity of these capabilities. And we can obviously look at performance based on our core business, our core capabilities, and also our enabling capabilities as well. So how do we do that? Creating overlays, right? So as soon as we start overlaying, where is strategy important across my business? I'm actually mapping my strategic goals or objectives across each capability. And as soon as I create a relationship between capability and strategy, I can now track performance. How are we performing against these strategies or these goals? So if I have now a pain point overlay on the capabilities, well, here are the risks. These are the things that are holding me back from performing well. So I know if I take them out and actively remove these pain points from the company, I'm going to be improving performance. So I release the capability to be able to perform much better. So if I now also overlay capability maturity, I immediately get a view of what's my current state capability maturity. And when I see a dashboard of red across the capabilities, I know immediately where I am weak. If I know I'm amber or green, I know amber means I've got some issues that need to be managed, and I know which ones are working well and I don't need to do anything about. So I can now direct investment. So as soon as I overlay my investment profile on my capability model, it shows me what I'm investing in to take away the pain and improve my capability maturity. So similarly, I can provide a risk view across capabilities as well. What are the risks to the operating model from delivering strategy effectively? And if I add my product and service view, immediately I know the things that are either going to hold me back from delivering the wow product and service, or I know the things that are going to help me to deliver the product and service so that my organization can perform better. And as enterprise architects, we know that we do data application and data and application overlays on the capability model as well. And that also shows us which data assets actually help us to perform better, which applications are helping us to perform and deliver against those KPIs as well. So immediately you can see by creating any of these overlays on your capability model, you now have set yourself up with a dashboard you can use with the business to communicate how are you going, right? Are you working on the right things or not? So as soon as we overlay data, we create insights, right? Because we've given data context. So if we add pain point data on there, the insight we're delivering is show me which capabilities are being held back from performing and achieving their KPIs. And when you see the reds or the ambers, you know that some action needs to be taken, and you've got the data and the evidence to help you make those decisions and make the right decisions based on evidence. So here are just some sample models that I've used with a client to show how to use your capability model to report performance. So the one on the right's about maturity. Red's bad, amber's not that great, but a little bit better than bad. Obviously a very young organization in this context. Over here, I've got an overlay on roles which says who is accountable for delivering this capability. So that's the people component mapped to capability. So again, I know that I may have performance issues here because I've got 2 people accountable for delivering that capability. How am I going to work out what these people are actually accountable for? Because accountability needs to be defined in SMART terms as well. I can now start using these overlays, and I know this is the strategy overlay, but if I wanted to do a KPI overlay, show me the KPI for each of these capabilities. What is the key performance indicator that we're trying to achieve? And if we start overlaying it on this maturity model, you can basically see any capability that's red and has a KPI for performance mapped to it is going to struggle to achieve it. So add the investment overlay to say, well, will this project help us improve that? So will the target state be better than red, right? So you can now have a conversation with a manager to say, if the future state or the 2B isn't going to change color, then perhaps this is the wrong project for us to be doing to help improve performance. So here are some example KPIs you can overlay on your capability model. There are websites galore. If you just Google it and you look at capability KPIs, I've segregated them, grouped them according to business domains. These are just to use yourselves as food for thought in terms of what are some of those overlays I can put on my capability model. So if we look at complaints, if somebody makes a complaint, you want to know which capability actually contributed to the issue that resulted in the complaint. And therefore, what do we need to improve in that capability so that issue does not occur again? So you can correlate complaints to capabilities as well. So moving on really quickly, otherwise we're going to run out of time on IT capability models. So all of us have dealt with at some level capability models in IT. This one comes from the Open Group and is called the IT for IT model, and I absolutely love it. And I love it because it's based on a value chain, and it really addresses one of the gaps I found in a lot of IT capability models in terms of it's now got a request to fulfill section instead of it just being the old COBIT plan, build and run model. We actually have a deliver model, which is based on request to fulfill. All the enabling capabilities are pretty much the same as any other type of model. Here's a capability model that's based on ITIL. Again, feel free to use it if you want to. And then there's the COBIT model, which a lot of companies use as their IT capability model as well. So the one that I have used, and moving on into this section, applying what we've learned, is the the IT for IT model, which again, happy for you to copy this off and expand it, extend it, do whatever you want out of this model. But now we have an IT capability model that we can start using as our dashboard, right? How do we report the performance of IT to the business? You know, how goes IT? So whilst we have these KPIs here, we've done a maturity assessment across these IT capabilities. So if you can see, we've got these little, again, you don't need to read this model, but just note the colors. So with this particular client, I did capability maturity assessments based on people, process, information, and technology. And for strategic planning, the technology is just perfect for what they need. To be honest, they're just using Excel spreadsheets, but that's where they want to be, and that's their green. But we know that in order to improve strategic planning, all we've got to do is fix the process and it will turn to amber, right? So when you use this now as your performance management tool, hey, here are the areas we're actually weak in, right? Where we're not performing really well. And for these clients, it was a big recognition in terms of we don't manage our relationships with our business really well because we don't pick the right projects to work on. It all comes to us as a wish list. There's no sense of priorities. There's no demand management. So that whole strategy to portfolio segment is deep red. And now they are going to use this with their management team to now talk about what should our future state look like. They basically have said, well, we're not going to be able to improve strategic planning because that's too difficult for now. But what we're going to do is focus on fixing demand, enterprise architecture, portfolio management. And you would have seen there is a color change between the as-is and the 2B. And Roxanne, the overall heat mapping is really what's the minimum maturity level. So if you have one red, the overall maturity will be red. So your current state maturity is always based on a min value because you're only as mature as your weakest link. If your process is immature, your whole capability is immature as well. So what we basically now are going to do is say, well, I know what the target is. So how do I actually work out how I'm performing? So the gap that I find is that people don't have a way of reporting how am I performing in terms of arriving at my target state. That's the measurement framework that's missing. So we know what happens in the middle of your as-is and your 2B, right? We have a whole number of projects in the middle that's going to help us achieve our target state. We need to build our performance reporting frameworks based on what improvements have these projects delivered. So we can see from week to week or month to month or whatever your reporting period is, that our investments and change are helping us slowly and incrementally work our way towards our target state. So what typically happens in an enterprise architecture team, and I know having worked on a number of consulting projects, we create the as-is and the 2B and we give our customers the roadmap and then we parachute out of the company. So we actually never see the execution of projects and how did that contribute to the organization's performance. And that target organization performance is reflected in your 2B capability model, right? So again, if you set up your KPIs on your 2B target model, you will see that as you are delivering your projects, those KPIs change over time. And you're hoping that the change is heading north towards helping you achieve your target state. And so now you have a dashboard, right? You've got a really good tool to now overlay KPIs on each of these capabilities. And when you do your capability maturity assessment and you're now observing projects executing, they're delivering improvements, how are these improvements now contributing to helping me achieve those KPIs, right? So again, some of the things for you to think about is once you define your KPIs, make sure you have an owner who's accountable and responsible for the performance of that KPI and somebody who is responsible for reporting it as well, right? Determine what the frequency of those KPIs are going to be reported at, because that forms part of your performance reporting system. And who's going to receive the report? I still remember a story that was told to me years ago when somebody did a process improvement review. And they got to this one person and they asked him, so what report are you responsible for? And he said, oh, XYZ. And then XYZ report, what do you do with it? And he said, I put it in my in tray every Friday afternoon. And what do you do? Who takes it? Oh, no one takes it. And then what do you do with it? Oh, at the next Friday, I take last week's report and I put it in the bin. So here's a person who has no idea who their stakeholder is and why they're creating that report. So don't be like that, right? So know what data you need to collect and what your sources are. So one of the big problems which I see in performance reporting systems is that people don't know the source that they are going to get the data from to be able to report the KPI. So that's what happens when you create an unrealistic KPI, right? It's unrealistic because there's no real data to help support that, right? So know the source and know what you need to do to transform that data so you can report it. And then, of course, who will report the data, right? And Greg, absolutely, ownership of the KPIs is really important. If you don't have an owner, it's not going to get reported, plain and simple. So structure your own IT reporting framework. Again, this is just a simple idea of how to get started. You know, look at your reports. I know I put the bad example of number of open tickets. You know, is something that you may want to report. Your IT risk radar, your cybersecurity posture at any point in time. These are just ideas of what you could put into your performance report. And that's pretty much it. And this is where, you know, we have a quick little discussion on, do you think KPIs are a waste of time because no one really reads the report? What do you think? And that's pretty much it for me, Andrew.
Thanks, Christine. Really, really appreciate that as always. I'm always amazed by the depth of your knowledge and just how easy you present it. So really pleased to have you on again. What I'd like to do is just, I think, open it up if you want to raise their hand, and then we can just have you ask any questions or can mine into Christine's vast experience, then so please go for it.
And I do have to apologize. I know there are lots of people on the chat line, but I couldn't read and talk at the same time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll contribute a comment. Yeah, I think, well, KPIs are really a form of communication between two entities. So it's the team performing the job and the management who are assessing whether the team is doing the job adequately. So to your point, Christine, the answer to that question, I think, depends. It depends on how KPIs are structured in the organization, how they're valued, right, and how reliable they are, and how they're used in terms of intent. So if management's using it as a way to beat more productivity out of a team that's struggling and putting out and firefighting, they're probably going to be viewed very negatively as in imposing more control over something that's untenable. But if they're used to reward people, like say, oh, you achieved this KPI, we're going to reward you with, you know, more varied jobs or, you know, greater responsibilities and commensurate pay, and we're going to put you on a fast track to senior management if that's what you want. You know, we'll give you more autonomy because you've done very well with your current KPIs, then becomes a positive thing. So it's just a tool, right? But if nobody picks up the tool and uses it to do a useful job, it's completely a waste of time and money.
Absolutely. And, you know, you're spot on. If you're going to set somebody with a KPI, it's got to be, you know, for a very good reason. You have to understand the what and the why. And what's the reward at the end of it. And it's the same thing for organization KPIs as well. The CEO, you know, sets KPIs for the organization performance and the board approves it. But guess what? If the organization doesn't achieve their KPIs and fails, you can imagine the consequences and the actions the board's going to take with that particular CEO, right? So quite often CEOs don't set unrealistic KPIs for performance because quite often they don't want to lose their job. It's as simple as that. So at that same time, people need to have realistic KPIs set as well, because you need to feel that you can achieve it. It can't be unrealistic. Chris, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I like the heat map overlays on capabilities. I do that quite often. I also agree that there's too many KPIs are measuring the wrong things. What I like to do is make sure that we're clear on the value drivers decomposing your objectives into measurable value drivers and a smaller set of value drivers. And then when you're defining the work that needs to be done to enhance, enable, or improve a capability, make sure that you got an explicit tie to those value drivers. Because if you don't, then you have to question, is the work of value at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of using value driver trees as well, because they are KPI driven too, or metrics driven. And you can therefore map that directly onto your benefits management frameworks as well, so that you understand what you're trying to deliver and why.
And I think the step that people miss is they've got defined objectives, but the objectives aren't measurable and smart. And they've actually, in the value tree, missed that last step, which is the value driver itself.
Yeah. So there is a lady here in Brisbane. Her name's Stacey Barr. If anybody wants to look her up, I met Stacey close to about 15 years ago, and she honestly understood metrics far better than I've ever known anyone else in my career. She has a website, so check her out if you want to learn more about KPIs and metrics and measure. I mean, I learned from her. So if you want to learn from the guru of gurus, check Stacey Barr's website out. Anybody else? Nate?
Just a small comment building on the discussion that Ben was mentioning around how people feel in response to the use of KPIs. I think a key factor is on the other side of a report, let's say it is used, you still need to have a culture of trust that the type of decision-making from management is going to be the kind of decision-making that is less blame-oriented and more like let's work together, more collaborative about whatever issues get surfaced. It's like, how do we really get to tackling process and system issues and building the capabilities of people, not just building the capability of the high level organization and trying to shove out people. So if you know, okay, this is a more punitive culture and we've identified an issue, then you're more likely to be like, I don't trust this community to deal with this issue, right? And maybe I'm going to try to deal with it alone. Versus, oh, okay, let's make sure everybody sees this. Let's get this out in the open and let's all kind of learn together and tackle this collaboratively.
Absolutely. Culture plays such a significant role in performance management systems. The companies I've loved working for, and I really enjoyed my time in Emirates and Rio, because I learned all about performance management systems and how they fit into enterprise architecture, why it's so important for enterprise architects to understand performance management systems, because we cannot hope to help lead and direct projects and change unless we know what it is we're trying to achieve. And that what it is we're trying to achieve is, what's the KPI you're asking me to jump? How high, how wide, how deep, and all of those questions come down to knowing your KPIs and metrics, and therefore knowing the capabilities that are required to deliver on those metrics becomes important. Daryl, before I get to you, Roxanne had another question in the chat around what's the difference between capability models and the IT one that I shared. Roxanne, there is no difference. The IT model that I shared is a business capability model as well. It is just part of the enabling capability that you would typically see in a value chain and capability model. I've just expanded it and drilled it down. And what do I see the role of business architecture and organization performance measurement? They're front and center. They're helping facilitate the conversations with the business using the capability model. So if I have to facilitate a workshop with my clients, I talk to them about how will you know that this capability is achieving the outcomes that it is meant to. That's a metrics conversation. And I help them to do the mapping of those KPIs onto the capability as well. So because we create the capability model, we can facilitate. We don't have to own the performance management framework or system, but we can facilitate the conversation. Daryl?
Christine, what have you seen in your experience in terms of the ability to measure things like this inside a scaled agile environments, whether it's SAFe or DA or the Spotify model. How do you see this manifesting in those types of environments?
Carol, for me, any organization that's doing agile, whatever approach or whatever flavor of agile you're trying to do, the capability model actually gives us the scope for each of our agile projects, right? And besides scope, also gives us the priority, right? So if I had to go and deliver change in an organization and I want to look at across the organization, what's the priority for change? And therefore, what should I work on first? Agile is all about responding really quickly. If we get the direction in terms of what epics are important, the capabilities will tell us that, right? The capabilities will tell us what's the change that we're required to deliver, and therefore what's the epic, right? So we can describe that as an epic that then gets translated down using the agile terminology. You go from epics to, can't remember what's in the middle, but you go to your user stories, and then you go into your release trains. I'm not an agile expert, so please don't expect me to use perfect agile language. But again, through just doing portfolio planning, we can then define the epics. And then when we come down to do program planning or PI planning, you're then working on what are the KPIs that I need to deliver to for each one of these capabilities. And then that gets translated down into a user story, which is your package of change. Hope that made sense to everybody who's an agile expert.
Great. Thanks, Krista.
No worries. Okay, scrolling down. Okay, cool. You're on mute.
Christine, I think you've managed to deliver us nicely on time, as always. A little bit of a run over there, but that's absolutely fine. So I think we're at an end. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time. Christine, again, thank you very much for your input. It's very much appreciated. I look forward to next year, hopefully running a couple of face-to-face meetups, but I'll start to get some agenda out for 2022. And as always, if anybody would like to speak or has something they'd like to say, just feel free to ping me a line and we'll get you talking. I just want to wish everyone a really good festive season, and we'll see you next year.
No worries. And I've just popped my contact details as well. If anyone wants to reach out, check our website out. I did want to make an announcement today, and unfortunately, Tom Graves didn't make our call today, Andrew, but Tom Graves has joined our Coaching Enterprise Architects Network as well, and has written a lovely newsletter on the website too, in terms of telling architecture stories. So if you want to go head over to the page and have a look at it and give us some feedback. What are your thoughts as well? Love to hear from all of you.
Thanks. And Gregory, just an answer to your quick question. We're planning to do some online version as well. So if we do a face-to-face, we'll do a video link. It's a little bit hard for you to go to Sydney for some beer and pizza, so we'll get that sorted.
Great, thanks.
But what I'll do as well is I'll share the video for everyone else and your slides as well, Christine, if you're okay with that, and
absolutely
give everyone Christine's contact details. So great session again, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks all for the questions as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. I look forward to seeing Tom's work as well, Christine. It's going to be interesting.